In 2025, I wish all my friends overseas good health, abundant wealth, smooth sailing in everything you do. Happy New Year, everyone! Some of you may already know that this is the year of the snake in the Chinese zodiac. If you were born in 1953, 65, 77, 89, or 2001, then this is your year. So you can wear red clothing or accessories during this year, and it can boost your luck and keep you safe. In Chinese culture, snakes have always held a certain sacredness. People commonly believe they are the predecessors of dragons. After thousands of years of cultivation, they can eventually transform into a dragon, and because of this, there's a strong taboo against killing snakes, as it's thought to bring misfortune upon oneself. So for this special episode, I'll be sharing 4 short stories, and 2 of them involve snakes. I know some of you might be scared of them, so I've made all the snakes pink in the video. And I also give a 5-second jump scare warning beforehand. Hope this helps you enjoy the stories without any unpleasant surprises. Alright, enough talking, let's dive in. In 2008, Beijing hosted the Olympic Games, grabbing the world's attention. The iconic venues, like the bird's nest and water cube, left a deep impression with their modern, innovative designs. But what most people don't know is that some strange incidents occurred before these buildings were constructed. If you've been to the bird's nest, you might have noticed an ancient, sprawling temple nestled among the ultra-modern architecture. It feels completely out of place. That temple is called Beijing Goddess Temple, where deities like Xiao are worshipped. Over the years, there have been countless legends, some true, some not, but today, I'm going to share something I personally experienced, and I promise it's 100% true. The temple has a nickname, the Snake Temple. Both inside and outside the temple, and even underground, is teeming with snakes. My dad once told me that when he was a kid, the temple had been converted into a school, and he actually studied there. Back then, snakes would coil themselves around the beams of the classrooms, almost like they are interested in learning too. The strange thing was, the snakes never hurt anyone, and the kids weren't scared of them. Over time, the villagers came to care deeply for the snakes, and the two lived in harmony. When Beijing's Olympic bid succeeded, the government began selecting sites for the new stadiums. Then their eyes fell on this temple and planned to demolish it. Naturally, the villagers protested fiercely. For one, they didn't want to leave the land they had lived on for generations. And second, they saw the temple as a guardian of the village and didn't agree with tearing it down. In the end, the government offered a huge compensation package, but even so, many of the elderly villagers still refused to leave. Left with no choice, the site was shifted a bit, and the bird's nest was built next to the holdouts. As construction progressed, the crew discovered that the soil beneath the area was unusually loose. When they dug deeper, they uncovered a massive pit, and it was absolutely crawling with snakes. The snakes, disturbed and frightened, began scattering everywhere. The workers, shocked and at a loss for what to do, immediately halted work. But what happened the next day left them even more stunned. As the smaller snakes scattered, people noticed a massive one coiled at the bottom of the pit. I want to say it myself. It was enormous, lying there completely still, probably hibernating. For my young self, the sight left a lasting scar on my mind. The entire village was in an uproar. Many villagers started claiming that this was a snake deity, the guardian of their land. Some of the elders even said that the snake must have lived for thousands of years and was likely close to transforming into a dragon. They urged everyone not to disturb it. The construction crew, of course, didn't buy into these beliefs. They immediately contacted their superiors and the local zoo to figure out how to move the snake. What followed was chaos. The villagers, determined to protect the giant snake, clashed with the demolition crew. They took turns standing guard around the pit, making sure the crew couldn't get anywhere near the snake. This standoff dragged on for days. The construction team was growing increasingly frustrated. But then something unexpected happened. As I mentioned earlier, the villagers saw the snake as a divine protector, so they were deeply concerned about his well-being. Fearing that the snake might be cold, Some of them started bringing blankets to wrap around it, covering it snugly to keep it warm. But their good intentions backfired. Tragically, they ended up smothering the snake to death. Now the construction crew was thrilled. The snake was dead, and they could finally proceed with their work without any more resistance. The government even stepped in to remove the snake's massive body, offering additional compensation to the villagers for the demolition. Reluctantly, the villagers agreed to move, but this wasn't the end of the story. In fact, this was just the beginning. Initially, the demolitions progressed smoothly, but the moment they touched the temple, strange events began to unfold one after another. First, the moment they began dismantling the temple, the construction equipment started malfunctioning. Of course, no one thought much of it and decided to push ahead, but then, out of nowhere, the power just went out. No matter how hard the electricians worked, they couldn't figure out what was wrong. Even when governments brought in experts and engineers, they were scratching their heads too. I remember it so clearly. This blackout wasn't just some local thing. It even hit my apartment complex. To make things even stranger, people noticed that the bulldozers only started breaking down when they got near the temple. The moment they were moved somewhere else, they worked perfectly fine. But despite this, the team wasn't ready to give up. They decided to go old school, tearing it down by hand. That's when they truly angered the goddess. I remember the morning had been perfectly clear, not a cloud in the sky, but out of nowhere, a violent windstorm swept through, followed by a tornado. But Beijing's 71-year recorded weather history had never included a single tornado. It just doesn't make sense. Later, I learned through the news just how devastating it was. The tornado caused 44 injuries among the workers, 5 of them critical, and 2 deaths on the spot. The entire construction site was wrecked, with all the equipment destroyed, but the temple remained completely untouched, not a scratch. At that point, the construction team had had enough. They immediately reported the situation to their leader and even hired several feng shui masters for advice. In the end, a high-ranking official personally visited the temple to make an offering and ask for blessings, promising that the temple would not only remain intact, but also be renovated and its statues restored in gold. From that moment on, no further obstacles appeared. The government preserved the temple's main halls, the 2 bell towers, and the mountain gate exactly as they were. Now, once a year, the temple is open to the public for worship. I went there once myself. They had indeed restored the statues in gold. The bird's nest was eventually completed without a hitch, but every time I see it, I can't help but think about the giant snake. After all, snakes like climbing trees and eating bird eggs. Maybe this massive structure was built as a tribute to the snake, a way to ensure its spirit could finally rest in peace. After reading this story, I did a little research. Turns out, this temple is home to several toy deities, with Lady Bixia Yuanjun being the most important one. She oversees women fertility, beauty, wisdom, and safety. No wonder a tornado showed up when they tried to tear it down, because safety was being taken away. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a snake with legs, just a water snake, but with feet that look like chicken claws. Well, I've seen one. My hometown is a remote mountain village on the border of Yunnan and Guizhou. It was the summer of 1999, and I was 12 years old, on break for summer vacation. One day, a friend and I went into the woods to cut grass for the horses. As we wandered, we ended up by a small river. The sun was blazing that day, so we decided to take a dip to cool off. Near the river, there was this ancient stone bridge. Whenever the sun was out, tons of water snakes of all sizes would slither up onto the edges of the bridge to bask in the heat. It was pretty common for us to catch one to play with. That day, just like always, we grabbed a snake before heading home. This one was about as thick as a thumb, a bit longer than usual, roughly a meter. We tied a firecracker string around its head, fastened it to our basket, and brought it back with us. Once we got home, we gathered a few more kids, smeared some oil from the tobacco pipes onto its body to see how it would move on dry ground. The snake started slithering, and we were chasing after it, laughing and shouting. But suddenly, one of the kids screamed, "It got legs!" We all rushed over, and sure enough, there they were. On either side of his belly, 2 little claw feet. The feet had 3 toes each, 2 in the front and 1 in the back, just like a chicken's. We were terrified. No one dared to chase it anymore. My friend, the one who'd gone with me to cut grass, was so scared that he kicked the snake. And wouldn't you know it, his kick sent the snake flying straight into a wall, killing it on impact. The snake lay there motionless. Cautiously, we crept closer and saw that both of his claws had snapped off when it hit the wall. Honestly, we felt awful. Our plan had been to play with it for a while and then let it go, but now we were left staring at this unsettling thing, feeling a mix of fear and guilt. We thought that was the end of it, but then something really strange happened. Something that haunts me to this day and has left me terrified of snakes ever since. Not long before school started, the friend who kicked the snake suddenly couldn't walk anymore. But just the day before, we'd been playing together as usual. But the next day, his legs simply gave out. His family rushed him to the hospital, where the doctors delivered a devastating diagnosis: advanced bone cancer. That news shook all of us to the core. Back then, in our small, remote village, cancer was almost unheard of, just as rare and incomprehensible as winning the lottery. In the following days, his father took him to the best hospitals in Beijing and Shanghai, desperately seeking a different answer, but every doctor said the same thing. It was too late. Even amputation wouldn't stop the cancer from spreading. So, his father decided to bring him back home to spend his final days. A year and a half later, I saw him again, and the sight was heartbreaking. He had wasted away to skin and bones, but his legs, those legs, were grotesquely swollen, each one as thick as a child's waist. One weekend, some friends and I decided to visit him. It was around lunchtime, and we were eating at his house when we suddenly heard an ear-piercing scream. A raw, guttural wail filled with unimaginable pain. We rushed into his room, and the scene we stumbled upon froze us in our tracks. His thigh had split open. Blood was spraying everywhere, splattering the walls and floors like a scene straight out of a horror movie. We stood in the doorway, paralyzed with fear, while his family scrambled into action. His father desperately tried to staunch the bleeding with his bare hands, and his sister frantically began cleaning up the blood-soaked room. I swear, even now, thinking about it sent chills down my spine. That was the last time I saw him alive. The next time I saw him, it was at his funeral. This incident ended as abruptly and mysteriously as it began. To this day, whenever my childhood friends and I meet and talk about it, we can't shake the eerie feeling that there was more to the story. Some of us can't help but believe it was connected to the snake with legs, the one he killed, the one whose fate he broke. Maybe the snake took his leg as revenge. Okay, in Chinese folklore, certain animals like snakes, hedgehogs, weasels, and foxes are believed to have spiritual energy. They can gain magical powers after thousands of years of cultivation, so harming them can lead to revenge, or even death. Speaking of this, there's a fascinating legend about weasels. It's said that after enduring long and grueling cultivation, a weasel can transform into a human-shaped body. But there's a shortcut: gaining recognition from the chief of all living beings, humans. Here's how it works. A weasel will wait at a certain spot for someone to pass by, then suddenly stand up and ask, "Do I look human to you?" The tricky part is, you can't say no, but you also can't say yes. If you say no, it denies all the hard work the weasels had done, causing it to lose energy drastically. It'll hold a grudge against you and look for a chance to get revenge. But if you say yes, then if it eventually completes its transformation and starts doing bad things, you'll share the blame, since you encouraged its cultivation. So what's the right move? Ignore it. Don't say a word. It might pester you for a while, but it'll eventually get bored and leave you alone. Of course, I've never encountered such a creepy weasel myself, but I think this legend is pretty intriguing. My hometown lies in the flat plains of eastern Henan. Some of you might be familiar with our funeral customs, especially the tradition of making 纸扎, intricate paper effigies. These can range from paper figures and horses to modern items like paper TVs, cell phones, and washing machines. They are meant to be burned during funerals so the deceased can enjoy them in the afterlife. But even though they are just made of paper, these creations often carry a strange, mysterious aura. This story is something I experienced personally, and perhaps it might offer some food for thought. It was 1988 and I was in the 4th grade. Spring Festival was approaching and we were already on winter break. Around that time, one of my friends, Gally, had something extraordinary happen. His family bought a television. In our underdeveloped village, this was a momentous event. Every evening, we'd scarf down dinner and then rush to his house, cramming our little heads together to watch the glowing screen, utterly mesmerized by the programs. Gally's family made a living crafting zhizha. Every time I visited, their house was filled with paper effigies. Even though we were young, those things gave us goosebumps. If it weren't for the allure of the TV, I wouldn't have stayed in that house a second longer. I remember that particular afternoon well. A light snow began to fall from the gray sky. Suddenly, we noticed a crowd gathering at the village food depot. It turned out that an old bachelor had died in a fire there. So that evening, Gally's family began preparing zhizha for his funeral. When I arrived at Gally's house, the workshop was bustling. They were making all sorts of paper offerings, furniture, houses, and even a paper woman styled like someone from ancient times. She wore a green cotton jacket on top, bright red pants below, and red embroidered shoes. Her pale paper face was painted with almond-shaped eyes, a delicate cherry mouth, and 2 red spots on her cheeks that looked both eerie and comical. Without thinking, I blurted out, "That paper woman is so ugly. Is she supposed to be the bachelor's wife or something?" Before my laughter had even died down, Gally's grandfather barked angrily. "Who dare speak nonsense here?" Gally's older sister also scolded me and promptly turned on the TV to distract us. "Stop talking and watch TV quietly," she said sternly. The TV program hadn't started yet. It was just playing some commercials. Normally, even those commercials could keep me entertained, but today, as I sat there, something felt off. I had this nagging sensation that someone or something was watching me with a cold, piercing gaze, tracking my every move. I discreetly turned my head, scanning the room out of the corner of my eye. Under the dim light bulb, Gally's family was focusing on work. No one noticed me at all. My friends, too, were glued to the TV, seemingly unaware of anything unusual. Finding nothing amiss, I turned back toward the screen. But that feeling of being watched only grew stronger, more intense. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I spun around, and my gaze landed directly on the paper woman, the one I had insulted as ugly. In that fleeting moment, I saw something that froze me to my core. She was staring at me. Her lifeless, slanted eyes were fixed on me with an icy, deathly glare. My scalp tingled as if an electric current had jolted through it. Cold sweat drenched my back in an instant. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. Slowly, I shuffled closer to Gally, seeking comfort in his presence. At that moment, I had shifted to a spot that gave me a different angle. Then, summoning all my courage, I turned to glance at the paper woman again, but what I saw nearly made my soul leave my body. She wasn't just staring anymore. She was looking directly at me. This wasn't some sideways glance or trick of the light. Her hollow eyes were locked onto mine. Terrified, I snapped my head back toward the TV and glanced around the room. No one else seemed to notice anything strange. Trying to keep calm, I tugged at Gally's sleeves and whispered, "I want to go home." But he was engrossed in the TV show and brushed me off. Just then, a villager who had been visiting Gally's family got up to leave. Lucky me. No hesitation, I followed him out, desperate to escape. Gally called after me, surprised, but I didn't dare look back. My entire body felt stiff as I hurriedly shuffled out of the house. By now, it was past 9 o'clock. Under the faint moonlight, I followed close behind the villager, my fear gradually fading as we walked. As we reached the food depot, the site of the old bachelor's tragic death, the villager suddenly stopped. He stood at the entrance, lit a cigarette, and started chatting with someone nearby. My stomach sank. That place, where someone had burned to death just earlier that day, was the last place I wanted to linger. I couldn't stand it anymore, sprinting toward home as fast as I could. Under the moonlight, I tried my best to figure out which way to go, with nothing but the sound of the wind howling in my ears. But then, out of nowhere, I suddenly got the eerie feeling that someone was following me. Meanwhile, I heard a weird rustling noise. Just like paper rustling in the wind, and in the dead silence of the night, it was way too clear. Gathering my courage, I came to an abrupt stop and turned around. There was no one there. Relieved but still uneasy, I turned back to continue on my way. But just as I was about to take my first step, I heard it. A raspy, cackling laugh. It sounded like an old woman laughing and coughing at the same time. My body froze as fear overwhelmed me. I collapsed into the snow, then scrambled to my feet and started running again, faster than ever before. When I finally saw my house up ahead, I started shouting at the top of my lungs, "Mom, open the door!" By the time I made it inside, I was drenched in sweat. Mom was shocked and asked me what had happened. At the same time, my dog, who was usually lively and alert, was cowering on the floor, tucking his tail between his legs, whimpering softly, as though he was afraid of something. I didn't dare tell her the truth, just mumbled something about being chased by a stray dog. Then I quickly dove under my blanket and covered my head. At some point, I must have drifted off to sleep. In a half-dream state, I began to feel an intense ache spreading through my body, like a weight pressing down on me. Struggling to open my eyes, I saw it. Standing silently by my bed was a paper woman, her pale, lifeless eyes locked onto mine. Unmoving, yet somehow filled with an unnatural presence. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. It was as if invisible chains held me in place. I could only lie there, frozen, completely powerless. When I woke again, sunlight streamed into the room. My mother had already called a doctor, who gave me an injection while a local spiritual medium burned paper offerings nearby. She murmured that I had been entangled by something, but reassured my mother it wasn't serious. Even now, many years later, I still can't shake the memory. Was it just my imagination playing tricks on me, or was I truly haunted, punished by the paper woman for mocking her? Paper men are one of the most classic elements of Chinese horror. Some of you might not really get the creepy vibe, but you can think of them as the Eastern version of Annabelle. They can come to life pretty easily. So that's why there's a strict taboo in the business. Before they are officially used, people must never paint the eyes on them. Adding the eyes is believed to activate them, and if we do it too early, don't be surprised if they started moving around when we fell asleep. The next story I'm about to share might not be true, but it's pretty interesting. Plus, it got me thinking about something I want to discuss with you all. When I was in elementary school, I once kept a mysterious and strange pet. I call it Xiao. I found Xiao one morning on my way to school. It was bronze-colored and about the size of a kid's fingernail. When I first saw it, I thought it was a button, but when I picked it up, I realized it was actually a bug. It looked super weird. Its back was covered with a hard shell, kinda like a turtle's. It had 4 long, skinny legs that could tuck neatly under its shell. The strangest part, its face. It was tiny, about the size of a mung bean, but it looked like a monkey's face, complete with a mouth full of sharp, pointed teeth. And on top of its head, it had 2 big antennae that would wiggle around whenever it was happy. At first, I thought Xiao was just some kind of unusual beetle, but later I realized it wasn't a bug at all. It was some kind of monster. When I brought Xiao home, I tried feeding it veggies, rice grains, even bits of ham, but it wouldn't eat anything. Before long, it looked like it was starving and barely hanging on. One day, while I was doing my homework, I left Xiao on my desk. Out of nowhere, it jumped into my pencil case, grabbed one of my paper clips, and started chomping down on it like it was the best meal ever. It ended up devouring 4 paper clips before it was full, and then it plopped onto its back with a big, round belly and fell asleep in my pencil case. That's when I realized Xiao eats metal. After that, I started buying paper clips for it to snack on. It kept growing bigger and bigger, and within 6 months, it was the size of a fist. Paper clips weren't enough anymore, so I upgraded to fitting in nails. Its appetite was insane. It could scarf down over 20 nails in one sitting, and eventually, it ate through all my pocket money. A year later, Xiao was as big as a small cat, and its appetite grew even more. It could finish off 2 boxes of nails in one meal, and I just couldn't afford to feed it anymore. So it started sneaking out at night to find its own food. That's when things got out of hand. Xiao began chewing up everything in the house: kitchen knives, frying pans, door handles, even the metal casing on the fridge. Of course, I never told my parents I was keeping Xiao, but when all these weird things started happening, I knew I couldn't keep it anymore. One night, I snuck out and left Xiao on the street. A few days later, neighbors started noticing their metal belongings mysteriously disappearing or getting chewed up, with bite marks left behind. I knew right away. It had to be Xiao. Later, I heard rumors that someone saw a bronze-colored creature about the size of a small dog sneaking around eating metal. One night, while it was munching on a metal basin, someone snuck up behind it and struck it with a knife. But as soon as the knife hit it, the creature burst into flames and turned into a pile of white ash. People speculated about what it could have been, but no one figured it out. However, after that, all the strange metal theft in our neighborhood stopped. When I found out Xiao had been killed, I was heartbroken and cried for days. Thinking back now, I'm not sure if Xiao was really the mysterious creature I raised or just a figment of my childhood imagination. So what I want to explore with you is, have you ever wondered if those legendary creatures might actually exist? The ones we've all heard about, like Bigfoot, the Yeti, Lake Champlain, or even China's dragons. Personally, I think there are still so many places in the world we haven't explored. It's totally possible that there are giant, wild species living in seclusion. And creatures like dragons, I think there's a chance they might be higher dimensional beings, ones we can't usually see with our eyes. Just last year, I came across tons of videos on Xiaohongshu, the Red Notes, where people claim to have captured footage of dragons. The most famous one has to be the water spout in Gaoyou, which even made it onto TV news back then. Let's take a look at it together. Alright, that's all for this episode. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Like I always say, the world is vast and full of mysteries. Let's explore them together at Asian Oddities. Happy New Year! See you next time. Bye bye.